Howdy, Immortalium here, and today I'm going to be discussing something that is a bit unusual, I guess, considering how old it is at this point and how unavailable it is. But I was writing a blog post recently, and I don't necessarily want to say what's in the blog post since it won't have come out by the time this video is released, but I do want to mention that one part of it was discussing a lineup called 10 Cent Manga, and it kind of reminded me, hang on, Ten Cent Manga was pretty good, and I should probably discuss it, let people know about it, that it exists. Even though it'll be difficult to get your hands on it if you're interested in it, at least you will be aware of it. So let's start off with what Ten Cent Manga actually is. Ten Cent Manga was an imprint that was set up as part of Picturebox, Picturebox being a publisher of unusual comics, whether they be American or international. And the person who was in charge of this imprint was Ryan Holmberg. And Ryan Holmberg had a vision that they would release older manga series that had a lot of influence from American popular culture, and that these manga series would be examined, discussed, etc., and they'd be able to release some pretty interesting, unusual manga series at the same time. So their inaugural release was actually a manga called The Last of the Mohicans. If you don't believe me, here it is. It's The Last of the Mohicans. And this was actually the inaugural release from them, which is interesting because I actually thought the next one was the inaugural release. But anyway, so this was their very first release under this imprint, and they did a really, really beautiful job with this release. But before that, a quick discussion. So the author of this manga was a guy called Shigeru Sugiura, and he was known for creating some pretty unusual, bizarre manga series. Particularly popular around the 50s. He regained popularity in the 70s, which actually plays a bit into this manga. Basically, his adaptation of The Last of the Mohicans in the 1950s was quite successful, and in the 1970s he produced a remake, that remake being this version here. So this is actually the 1970s release of it. And it is a very, very unusual adaptation of Last of the Mohicans. It kind of follows the story relatively normally, except for the fact that there's a lot of bizarre artwork and some really bizarre gags. So just to give you a couple of examples, it's not uncommon to see cartoony looking characters and realistic looking characters interacting with each other on the exact same panel. Which is very, very strange. And it plays very loose and fast when it comes to pacing, comedy, etc. And if I'm going to be completely honest, I don't necessarily think that this is a particularly great manga. It is an interesting read, mainly because I do actually quite admire a lot of the humor in this manga. But the story itself is very messy, and the characters are quite bland and underdeveloped. So from that perspective, it isn't a particularly great read, but I still enjoyed the comedy of it as well as the bizarre artwork. But the main thing that I really appreciated about this was how good a job Picturebox did with this release. It was released in a beautiful hardcover edition. It's huge. If you take a look at it compared to a standard tankobon, such as my Yotsuba, you will see it is utterly massive. And it is packed with so much good content. First off, the release of the manga itself is very, very genuine, in the sense that the color of the paper is a bit off. The blacks in this actually look kind of purplish, which was kind of how it looked originally. The paper quality itself, though, is very high quality, far higher quality than it would have been back in the day. There's an interesting interview with the mangaka himself, which is really interesting. But the best thing about this release, I think, is the essay that is provided by Ryan Holmberg, which goes really into depth about all of the American influences on this manga. And it is such an incredibly informative read, so well thought out, so well edited actually. If you take a look, you will see so many inclusions of pictures of the influences, which is something I always appreciate. It is such an unbelievably good release, and even though the manga itself was quite iffy in quality, I was super happy with how Picturebox released this manga. It was a sign of good things to come. And that good thing to come was, of course, people, you know I love me some Osamu Tezuka manga, and I was overjoyed when I heard that their next release would actually be an Osamu Tezuka manga. And in fact, I believe, as far as I'm aware, it's the oldest Osamu Tezuka manga in English. It's possible that there might be a new Treasure Island digital release which might predate this particular release, but in terms of physical releases, I do believe this is the oldest Osamu Tezuka manga present in English. It's certainly the oldest in my collection, and that is The Mysterious Underground Men by Osamu Tezuka. And this, my friends, is where this really kicked off in terms of unbelievably good quality. First off, the manga itself is actually surprisingly good. Admittedly, the artwork is quite rough compared to many of Osamu Tezuka's later releases, and the panel work in general isn't particularly inspiring, but it's still a really enjoyable story that's surprisingly emotional at points. The ending is particularly poignant and tackles some surprisingly deep themes. So even if the manga itself is relatively basic, I still think it's a surprisingly good read, and I'd certainly recommend that Osamu Tezuka fans seek it out and read it. In addition, I think anyone who's got an interest in manga history will certainly be interested in this book because of the fact that it is quite often considered to be the first story manga, as in a manga that has a beginning, middle, and end, character development, themes, etc., etc. And I do believe that this was released around 1948, but looking at the presentation of this manga, I was already pleased with the presentation of Last of the Mohicans, but this, I think, does even better. The only downside is the small trim size. Of course, if we compare it to my Yotsuba once more, you will see it is a little bit smaller than your standard tankobon, but I do believe that it is due to how this manga was released. I believe this is the format that the manga was originally released in Japan in the 1940s, and so they wanted to keep a trim size similar to that to be as authentic as possible, and I can definitely agree with that. The other thing that's really fascinating about this release is how the manga itself is presented. So again, the paper quality is very high, but it's printed on brown paper, or I believe it was referred to as red paper in Japanese. Anyway, regardless of what color it is, it's not your standard white paper. And the other thing that's really interesting is how the color is in the manga. So the manga itself is technically in color, but it's a very rough system. Basically, back in the day, it was a case where the mangaka would draw out the manga, and then other people would redraw the manga in order to be able to distribute the manga. So they had all these kind of like prints and stuff in order to be able to do the coloring and all that. And you can see that in this manga, there's a lot of very basic colors, but also quite often the coloring is actually ever so slightly off, which I find really fascinating. The shapes are correct, they're just not quite in the correct position, but still it's a really lovely looking manga. And I think the effort that Picture Box took in order to be able to present this in as genuine a format as possible is to be commended. And then of course we have an afterword by Osamu Tezuka who reminisces on The Mysterious Underground Men. Basically, I believe that the afterword was released when this got released as part of his complete works, so it's very interesting to be able to hear his own thoughts and attitudes on The Mysterious Underground Men. But of course we then get another incredible essay from Ryan Holmberg, and if you thought Ryan Holmberg did a good job with Last of the Mohicans, he does an exceptional job for The Mysterious Underground Men, taking a look at all of these incredible influences such as American comics, such as American movies or serials. Flash Gordon was an influence on this, which I find really fascinating, as well as a movie called The Tunnel. So much interesting information, and again it is presented excellently. I love the fact they include so many pictures of these specific comics or these posters or things associated with these programs or movies or books or whatever. So I think again this is an incredible release, and this is honestly, if I'm going to be completely honest, this is one of my proudest manga to own in a collection. I think it is such an exceptional release, and it's a release that I would love to be able to see more manga publishers do. So speaking of, I was saying about Ten Cent Manga, you know, how incredible their releases were, but unfortunately these are their only two releases, Last of the Mohicans and Mysterious Underground Men. It wasn't soon after the release of Mysterious Underground Men that Picture Box actually went bankrupt. They closed down, and with it the 10 Cent Manga imprint went down with them, which I think is such a shame. It was such a blow to the manga industry in terms of being able to get access to all these really old manga. It was a blow to enthusiasts such as myself who really admires a lot of these older manga series, would love to have seen more of them get released and more of them analysed and and get all of this informative commentary that Ryan Holmberg provides for them. I think it's such an incredible thing that they accomplished, even very briefly. And I think if you see one of these manga series, whether it be Less Than Mohicans or Mysterious Underground Men, available for a halfway decent price, then I'd strongly recommend you pick them up. I think they're worth it, particularly if you're into the history of manga. So that's something that I just kind of wanted to talk about. They're certainly out of print by now, and it will be hard to find them, but if you do see one, don't let it out of your sights. Definitely pursue it, as within reason, of course. So that was my discussion on Ten Cent Manga. Of course, I want to hear your guys' thoughts. Have you read either of these? If you have read them, did you like them? What do you think about the presentation of them? Do you agree with me that these are exceptional releases, or did you find some kind of problem that I'm unaware of? What do you think about Ryan Holmberg or Picturebox? And of course, if you have any other information about Ten Cent Manga, about Ryan Holmberg, about Picturebox, please leave it in the comments below. And of course, if you want to support the channel, I would encourage you to purchase your anime manga through my Amazon and Red Stuff affiliate links in the description below. When you purchase an anime manga through those affiliate links, not only are you supporting me, not only are you supporting the channel, but you're also supporting the anime and manga industry. So I'd highly encourage you to purchase your anime manga through those affiliate links. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment, rate, subscribe, and bye bye.